It appears we are live on Facebook right now. For those of you who are watching on Facebook, I'd like to welcome you. For those of you who will be watching later on YouTube, again, welcome. I'm going to be continuing with a bit about identification and hopefully getting into an internal considering, but it's been a very rich week for myself in terms of observing how identification manifests within me. So I'll be talking about some of that. Hopefully, perhaps Brian and Hisham may have noticed as well where you were identified. It's a quite interesting state. When I'm identified, it's like I lose awareness of myself and I'm pulled into whatever I'm identified with. And often what I'm identified with are actually within my own mind. They're the words and pictures that flow within my own mind. I notice that when I speak my thoughts, when I talk out loud, it's fairly easy, moderately easy for me to maintain an awareness of myself, to have that inward separation that, myself and observing the words that I'm speaking. But when the words are confined inside my head in that inner dialogue, some call that formatory thinking. When I engage in that, it becomes much more difficult for me to maintain this sense of I am, or this sense of separation from the surface of my being. I'm far more able to become aware and non-identified with my emotions. Even though my emotional circuit is in my body, I'm able to kind of step back and pay attention to my emotions. But that's something I've been working on for years, really trying to name the emotion, trying to be aware of what I'm feeling in this particular moment. But the I, as in the separated, stepping back. So we'll get to that, and I'll ask those of you here, and hopefully Ian will join. I'm not sure. I know that Karen is in Philadelphia. Her mother turns 95, so she will not be making it. I'm not sure where Angelica is. Hopefully Ian will get online and join us. But the vow of inner work. I work for myself. I work for mankind, and I work for the earth herself. And Mr. Gurdjieff's vow that he gave to one of his students, as recorded in Roger Lipsy's book, Gurdjieff Reconsidered, and translated into English, because he was taught this vow in French. I wish to be. I can be. I have the right to be. I have the ability to be. I swear to myself that this will never be for my personal profit, but to help others. I wish to be to help others. This is to be understood as a vow. Whoops, I'm not even sharing this, am I? It's one of those days where my mind is a little foggy. I woke up a little too early this morning and went to bed a little too late, so I'm not doing things quite the way I should be doing them, which is an interesting opportunity to observe myself, to observe my sort of tired, sleeping, drag-around self. It gives me the ability to separate the I from the it of my body, and to pay attention and to be aware that it is tired, that it is not working too well. So Angelica made it. Good morning, Angelica. Ian hopefully will be coming. Let's just jump into an inner exercise, and then I'll ask everyone how they're doing and if they've really worked with this process of being aware of identification. So let's just begin by becoming aware of our hands. Become aware of the fingers in your hands. Become aware of the top of your hands, the palms of your hands. Become aware of the bones in your hands. Really strive to become aware of your hands. And in this moment of observing your hands, become aware of one of the most important facts, one of the most important realizations that we can experience about any form of mindful awareness, or as Mr. Gurdjieff would call it, personal consciousness. In order to be fully aware of my hand, of the skin, the bones, the tendons, the ligaments, the muscles, the flesh, I actually have to inwardly separate from my hands in order to observe it. This is something we can more easily notice in our hands. To observe our hands, we have to step back and engage in what Mr. Gurdjieff called the separation of the self from the self. And this inward separation is extremely important, this awareness, this realization. Anytime we seek to stop identifying, anytime we want to engage in a process of non-identification, we have to pull back into what Mr. Gurdjieff called the I am. We've got to become aware of our own individuality. There's something within us that is observing our hands. So let's just try to observe our breath. Try to observe the sensation of air as it flows in through your nose, your nasal cavity, the back of your mouth, your throat, past your vocal cords, into your lungs. Try to observe the flow of air as it moves in and out past all of those points. Try to be the observer, observing the sensation of air flowing in and out. Try to be the observer, observing the movement of the muscles involved in breathing. Try to be the observer, observing the expansion and contraction of your diaphragm as it moves down the diaphragmatic cavity and back up. Try to be the observer, observing the movement of the muscles in your abdomen as your diaphragm expands down and they expand as well. Try to be the witness, witnessing the expansion and contraction of the muscles between your ribs. And these are all connected. The diaphragm is the main engine of our breath, and it's connected to certain muscles in the abdomen, and it's also connected to the intercostal muscles between our ribs. So observe how all of these muscles involved in breathing operate together. Be the observer, observing these muscles expanding and contracting. And then let's divide our attention slightly, holding one part of our attention on observing and being the observer, observing the muscles expanding and contracting, while also becoming aware of the sensation of air as it flows in and out. Being the observer, observing both the sensation of air and the movement of the various muscles involved in breathing. And then let's expand it a little bit more. Try to become the observer, observing your whole body breathing. So the observer observing the sensation of air flowing in and out, the observer observing the movement of the various muscles involved in breathing, and the observer, observing your body breathing. And realize that this awakening of the observer, of the witness, of the I am, is the first step. The first freedom is the freedom from identification. And if we haven't grown on the inside enough, it becomes difficult to do. I'll be talking about this later. So just try to become the observer, observing gravity and the effect of gravity on your body. Become the observer, observing the temperature of the air around you. Become the observer, observing perhaps the atmospheric pressure of the air around you. And then become the observer, observing internal sensations. Perhaps the inside of your mouth, the inside of your throat. Perhaps observing the expansion and contraction of your lungs. Perhaps being the observer, observing the sensation from inside your stomach. Try to be the observer, observing your bladder, your colon, observing the inside of your body. And then try to be the observer, observing the external sensations, the air that touches the skin on your face. Try to be the observer, observing the touch of clothing on your body. Perhaps you're wearing pants and a shirt. Try to be the observer, observing the difference in weave between your pants and shirt, or maybe your socks and shirt. Try to be that observer, observing your body, and recognize that we spend so much of our life in that state of physical identification where we're not aware of our body. We haven't moved back to that deeper, more inward place within us, that separation of the self from the self. Now we have a feeling circuit. Our feeling circuit, the primary feeling circuit, runs approximately from our duodenum, perhaps even the top edges of our large intestines, up through our duodenum, up through our stomach, our liver, gallbladder, our spleen, our pancreas, up into our lungs, our throat, our thymus, or our heart, our thymus, our throat. And here, and I'll be talking about this a bit later, this is all related to the vagus nerve, the 10th cranial nerve, which runs down from underneath our spine, our skull, our brain, and then weaves its way around. Vagus means wandering. And at the edge of the vagus nerves, there are ganglia, and these are actually neurons, brain cells. So we have brain cells at the very top of our large intestines, in our duodenum, in our stomach, in all of those internal organs that we have, in our lungs, heart, thymus, throat. And we can feel feelings along this circuit. And we can also feel feelings in our face, in our jaw, in our mouth, in our voice box, in the muscles in our face, in our smile, in our eyes, in our tear ducts. Try to be the observer, observing your feeling circuit. Step back from your feelings. Observe them. Do not identify with them. Try to become aware of your primary feeling circuit. Try to become aware of what you are feeling now in this moment as an emotion. We're always experiencing an emotion. Most of the time, we are so unaware of it. And those times we are aware of it, usually we're not really aware, we're just so identified with the emotion. with the anger, with the despair, with the joy, with the happiness. We lose this awareness of ourself, that inner self, the I am. So pay attention to your feeling circuit. Do you notice some kind of an emotion, perhaps in your gut, perhaps in your lungs, maybe your heart, maybe your throat? Perhaps you notice this in the way you hold muscles in your face. This is where I observe a lot of my own emotions. I just hold them, and I have certain physical, emotional postures for the muscles in my face. And I don't even notice it. I'm in such a state of emotional identification. It's only when I separate myself from myself and I become mindful of those muscles that I perceive, that I become aware, that I become the observer, observing the way I hold these emotions in my face. So pay attention to your feeling circuit. Try to name in your own mind what you're feeling now. In order to name what we're feeling, we actually have to step back into that observer position and observe our emotional state. We can't name it from within. We can only name it by engaging in that inward separation. And then just allow your attention to rest. And let's move through J.G. Bennett's 60-point exercise. Quite often, we subconsciously hold tension in our body. We're not even aware of our body. And this tension actually prevents the inward separation necessary to stop identifying. And so it's a good practice to learn how to relax your body, to just go into a nice, calm, comfortable state. And the J.G. Bennett 60-point exercise has a dual function, because for the main role, it's a relaxation exercise. Its minor role is as a self-sensing exercise. So we relax 60 points in our body, 30 down one side and then 30 up the other. And as we're doing this, as we are relaxing each point, we're also inwardly detaching, moving back to what Mr. Gurdjieff called the I am. So in this, you breathe in to the point, you breathe awareness in, and you breathe tension out. So following your own breath, following your natural rhythm of breathing, breathe awareness into the crown of your head, and then breathe tension out. Breathe awareness into the right side of your forehead, and breathe tension out. Breathing awareness into your right eye, and breathing tension out. The right side of your nose and face. Your right ear and the finer muscles in the right side of your head. The right side of your mouth and jaw. The right side of your throat and neck. Your right shoulder. Your right upper arm and elbow. Your right lower arm and wrist. the top of your right hand, your right thumb, your right index finger, your right middle finger, your right fourth finger, your right baby finger, the palm of your right hand, breathing awareness in and breathing tension out, the right side of your chest, the right side of your midriff, solar plexus, and abdomen, the right side of your upper back and right shoulder blade, the right side of your lower back, your right hip and buttock, your right upper leg and knee, your right lower leg and ankle, the top of your right foot, your right big toe, your right second toe, your right middle toe, your right fourth toe, your right baby toe, the bottom of your right foot, and now reversing this process and breathing in awareness and breathing out tension to the bottom of your left foot, your left baby toe, your left fourth toe, your left middle toe, your left second toe, your left big toe, the top of your left foot, your left ankle and lower leg, your left knee and upper leg, your left buttock and hip, the left side of your lower back, your left shoulder blade and the left side of your upper back, the palm of your left hand, your left baby finger, your left fourth or ring finger, your left middle finger, your left index finger, your left thumb, the top of your left hand, your left wrist and lower arm, your left elbow and upper arm, your left shoulder, the left side of your neck and throat, the finer muscles in the left side of your head and your left ear, the left side of your face and nose, your left eye, the left side of your forehead, and finishing at the top of your head. And then just allow your attention to rest. I like to add a little something to this exercise. We've moved our awareness down the right side of our body and we've brought our awareness up the left. And so, following your own natural rhythm of breathing, when you breathe in, pull your awareness up the left side of your body, and as you breathe out, breathe your awareness down the right side of your body, breathing your awareness in up the left and breathing your awareness down the right. And just do this for a few breaths. Try to be the witness, witnessing this flow down and up in conjunction with your breath. Try to be the observer, observing this process. as your awareness moves down one side and up the other. And then just allow your attention to rest. And I'm not going to go through the filling exercise, but however you can, in whatever way you can, try to sense your whole body. Try to become aware of your body as one organic whole. Try to develop the sensation of self. Try to become aware that you are the observer, observing the sensation of yourself. Try to separate from that surface of your being. Try to separate and get away from that normal state of attachment and identification that we spend most of our lives. Try to step back inwardly. And then, as you breathe in, bring your awareness to your solar plexus and think the word I. And as you breathe out, think the word am. As you breathe out into the sensation of your whole body, breathing the word I into your solar plexus, and then breathing the word am out into the sensation of your body. This is one of Mr. Gurdjieff's I am exercises. Breathing the awareness of I into your solar plexus and breathing the awareness am out into the sensation of your body. And just do this for a few breaths, following your body's natural rhythm of breathing. And then let's just finish with the collected state exercise. As the earth is surrounded by an atmosphere, so too are we surrounded by an atmosphere. Normally our atmosphere is dispersed. It's pulled in this direction and that direction. If we're identified with something, our atmosphere goes towards what we are identified with. But collect it. Draw your atmosphere back towards yourself. Keep it around your body, perhaps a meter, meter and a half. Perhaps you might even become aware of the boundary of your atmosphere. Keep it tranquil. Keep it still. Keep it calm. And we do this by keeping our mind tranquil, by keeping our sensations calm, by keeping our feelings quiet. So keep your atmosphere calm, tranquil, and quiet. Draw it close to you. And in a moment when I count from 1 to 3 and get to 3, just breathe your atmosphere in. And as you breathe out, imagine that some of the emanations within your atmosphere remain and settle within you to grow your inner being. 1, 2, 3. Breathe it in, and as you breathe out, imagine something remains. And then just repeat Mr. Gurdjieff's affirmation silently in your mind. May results of this exercise be transubstantiated within me. For my being. And I'm just going to pull up one of the little posters I made a few years ago. Let me give me 1 second. This has always been a somewhat mysterious one, particularly for newcomers to the teaching. Like what it does not like. And here, the secret to understanding this one lies in the fact that it is the body. In this quote, he's referring to the body. So if the body likes sitting in a certain position and it doesn't like sitting in another position, do what it doesn't like that other position. This is the first process whereby we begin to stop identifying. As Mr. Gurdjieff said, freedom from identification is the first freedom. But he also talks about the fact that if we haven't developed an awareness of the I am as separate from the it, we can't do it. We've got to somehow grow an inner awareness within ourselves, that separation of the self from the self. I'll be talking a little bit more about this further in this meeting, but we all started a bit late, cobwebs in my head. So Brian, how are things in Scottsdale, Arizona? Have you been pondering identification, trying to become aware of what it is, how it manifests within you in the last week? I've got you muted. I've got everyone muted. Just to unmute you.
Yeah, I have one thing that specifically stands out, though, is they closed down a bunch of roads for a race last week, and I got caught in traffic, and I was caught. I could tell that everyone was getting really frustrated because the roads were a mess, and I was in traffic for probably over an hour longer than I usually would have been, and I was able to observe the emotions of kind of just frustration and anxiety, and then realizing that they're in the body. And then it almost became pleasurable because I realized that I disidentified and I felt like I was, making work efforts that were, really, benefiting me. And it was kind of like practicing that.
Yeah. Mr. Gurdjieff, the phrase that he uses quite a bit is the separation of the self from the self. Are you able to get to that awareness where there's that you're aware that you're going back into something deeper, more profound within you and observing what's going on the surface?
Yeah, and then I was, and when I had that feeling, I was almost happy that I was in traffic because it gave me the opportunity to observe.
Yeah. Yeah, Mr. Gurdjieff said the more difficult the conditions in life, the greater the opportunity to work on ourselves. And one of his students had it was a woman, and she had a fairly unusual job in that day, in that she was up in sort of management level. And she said to Mr. Gurdjieff, would it be better if I took a more menial job and brought more suffering into my life? And he said it would. And so she quit her job and put herself into a situation where she would have a greater opportunity to observe herself. And you have the greater opportunity to get lost in traffic, to become those emotions, to become that rage, that anxiety, that frustration. But you also have the greater opportunity to see and separate from that. So The worse the conditions of life, the greater the opportunity to grow. That's a good observation. I think that one of the reasons I did so well, between 20 and 10 years ago was because I didn't have a car. And I used to have this real bad driving eye, and the frustration and just not driving was such a good thing for me to do. Ian, how are you doing there? I mean, both Brian and Ian, it's really early in the morning. I guess it's now 8:15. So, thank you guys for getting up early and joining these meetings on a regular basis. Ian, experiences with identification, trying to work with this?
Yeah, I noticed that it thinks, the separation from the thinking process. I may have frozen. My connection's a little bad. You guys still hear me?
We can hear you. You just are frozen visually.
Okay, good. That's fine. So the separation from the thinking process is relatively easy for me to do, probably because of my meditation background. I have to remember to do it. I can very easily be caught in the thoughts, but to notice it and pop out is pretty easy. The feeling center is a little more difficult for me, in that I can't quite make sense of a change. I don't know if that, like, the easy way to describe it is it feels like I'm always separated from my feelings, but that it doesn't the experience of it isn't as good as that description sounds. So there's something going on there. But what I've noticed about identification overall is, at least for me, it tends to be a moment where I actually stop observing. And I hold on to something, whether it's a thought or a feeling or a sensation or a tension in the body. I need things to be a certain way, and I try and keep them that way. The easiest way for me to notice that is by tuning into the body. The exercise you had us do this morning with the hands, when I'm
Okay, now we've lost your sound. So now you're moving, but we can't hear you. Before you were frozen and we could hear you, but we can't hear you. Sorry. But that's a really good observation there. Some of those observations that you made. Are you back again? Are you?
I can hear you.
We can hear you now. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to kind of finish the thought is, I can feel the information coming in through my hands, just the sensations of the skin and the muscles and all that, and that like there's a flowing quality to it, there's a moving quality to it, and when I stop observing, I there's a part of me that's like, oh yeah, I have hands, I can they're there, I can do things with them, but I lose that sense of aliveness. I lose that sense of something actually going on.
Yeah.
And that's the same is true everywhere else.
Mr. Gurdjieff, says that when we're in a state of identification, we're little more than a piece of meat. So we're sort of dead to ourselves. I think it was you quite a while ago who told me, maybe it wasn't you, but you did an experiment in thinking out loud by speaking.
Wasn't me, but it sounds interesting.
Okay, because that's what I've been doing this week. I was thinking, who told me this? And I somehow in my mind thought it was you. But, so I've been walking around when I'm alone, and I notice it's much easier for me to separate myself from myself, to step back, to non-identify when I'm speaking out loud. So I could be speaking the same thoughts that I might be thinking in my mind, but if I vocalize them, that allows me to become aware of them and not get pulled into them. And, another comment on an observation you just made, Mr. Gurdjieff said that identification is one-centered only. So we get stuck either in our thoughts or we get stuck in our feelings or whatever. And so when we begin to become aware of two centers, say our head, our thoughts and our feelings, it allows us to disidentify as well. Angelica, your microphone is muted. Can we unmute? Did you mute your microphone, Angelica? I can't unmute it. There you are. You're an artist. So you wrote in our private message group about there's a difference between you when you're by yourself in your place, engaged in your art, and then when you have to go out into the world. And can you elaborate on that?
Yes, I will try. When I'm here working, you hear me?
Yes, yeah.
I'm here in my studio, working with colors and with the music, and my emotional center is very relevant, obviously, for me. And then this week, especially this week, I needed to go out to offices. And it was a great opportunity for me because when I went out to the street, it seems that the other centers helped me to guide me more centered, not stay all the time in emotional center. When I go out, it's difficult. No? But I was at the office to become documents for my house. And it was very difficult because every people around are unfriendly and they were anger. I want this, I want that, blah, 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 every people. And I was there sitting in silence and observed that if I fighting against the officer man with the same anger, the same energy, we go nowhere. And I needed some documents, and I was there breathing and trying to be tranquil and calm. And after a time, Allan, I observed that I was alone there. Every people that were so fighting, nervous, went out, and I was in peace. And the man said for me, hello, you are waiting for your documents? And I said, yes, I am. How are you? And he said, oh, I am okay, thank you. And you can come next week. Everything will be all right. This was for me difficult because every people around with this so heavy energy, anger, and this and that. But was in the end I was in peace and free, because I could observe the third energy. You know what I mean? The people fighting, the officermen fighting, and they go nowhere. And I was, sorry, my English is so poor, but you understand. Third energy was necessary to transform this, and I become my document in peace.
The reconciling element in force, yeah.
Yes, and then when I went out to the street, my emotional center was in peace, and my energy was not full of, was not dirty, I don't know, with anger and this and that. This was a good experience, not easy, no? But was nice.
Yeah, I mean that's Brazil has a reputation for excessive documentation. You've got to go to this office and wait on a long line, and then you get a piece of paper and you go to another office and wait in a long line and get another piece of paper and you go to another office. And you know, in Canada we're not like that at all. We just
Now is about 6 months that I go all the time that and pay. Every time you must pay something. And they also doesn't know why you have to pay, but you must pay. And now next week I hope I will be there again and back this time.
Yeah. A good opportunity to observe yourself and people around you as well. Okay, Hisham, Morocco, North Africa. A little later in the day for you than the rest of us. Your observations on disidentifying, identification, states of identification. What can you add to this?
Well, I have a lot of observation about identification in considering, but when we talk about this kind of subject, it's difficult for me to talk about this thing because they have an emotional element in it when I understand them. So I will try my best. Well, for me, I observe that I am most identified with the thoughts that runs in my head when I take walk or when I go to the office on foot in the morning. Also, I get sometimes identified with the noises in the street, the cars and the noises of the traffic. But I try every time when I notice that I am identified with either my thoughts or with the traffic, to recollect myself, to separate the thinking center with the moving center, to calm down the moving center, because I think maybe it is when I have this identification with thoughts and this daydreaming, this imagination, it's because the the body is doing the work of occupying the mind, the thinking center. So I'm trying to separate between them and to calm down the body, and to notice the body, to sense it more, and that helps. I also, as you said, as it is the case by you, I am most identified when I am in identification. I am identified with the muscles in my face. So it happens sometimes when I disidentify with the body. I feel like I am not the body. There is a tension, but I am not that. I am not that. I can observe it. I don't know if that makes sense. It's really difficult to explain. Back in the past 2 or 3 years, I had a realization that that's what I take myself to be. The I is only a thought in my head. I don't know if that makes any sense. That it is a pressure in the body, in the thinking, in the thinking mixing with another. So I called it then. I give it the name, the body-mind identification. I don't know if that makes any sense. So what I do to work on this identity, I also I observed also that I am identified when I talk about a subject with my colleagues, I tend to identify, to talk passionately. It is an area that I have been working on these past 2 years. Now I can say that I have made a lot of improvements there. Sometimes I can even observe like hear my own voice. I feel like sometimes I get flashes where I am separated from my voice. I can hear myself. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Mhm.
So these are cases of my own observations with identification. Yeah, what I do what I do and when I have observed also, that I get peaceful when I try to when I separate the body from the mind, when I try to do what the body must do only with the body. That means that I do it with the energy of the body, which is not so fast, only calmly. So I feel very peaceful and present.
Okay, those are some very good observations there.
Alan,
Yes, Angelica.
yes, I could. What was it was important for me observe that when I use no violent communication, this officeman suddenly he was surprised when I said, "Good morning, how are you?" And just no violence in the communication is something that I try to do every day with people that I meet in the street or also come at home, because this goes nowhere for me. Yeah, this was nice to see.
Yeah. Communication is a good opportunity to practice the state of non-identification. I'm lucky being a hypnotherapist, and I do sort of talk therapy, coaching, counseling, questioning with my clients. I've trained myself over the last 10 years to self-remember when I am talking, so it becomes easier for me when I'm talking, much harder when I'm by myself and I'm trying to think through an idea. It's very easy for me to slip into that state of identification if it's just in my head. But I've trained myself otherwise, when I'm talking to people. I'm just going to share the screen again. We read this last week. I'm going to read it again. I've cut out the beginning part of it. Man is possessed by all that surrounds him because he can never look sufficiently objectively on his relationship to his surroundings. He can never stand aside and look at himself together with whatever attracts or repels him at the moment. And because of this inability, he is identified with everything. This too is a feature of sleep. You begin a conversation with someone with the definite aim of getting some information from him. To attain this aim, you must never cease to watch yourself, to remember what you want, to stand aside and look on yourself and the man you are talking to. But you cannot do it. 9 times out of 10, you will become identified with the conversation. And instead of getting this information you want, you will yourself tell him things you have no intention of telling. People have no idea how much they are carried away. And I'm highlighting this. I read this last week, and it was a bit bigger. I cut some of the quote. This is a profound exercise that we can all do to step aside, to stand aside and look at ourselves, to see what we're attracted to, what we're repelled by at that moment. So within conversations. Conversations give us this great opportunity to practice, to put these teachings into practice, to try to non-identify. In other words, not get attached to the words and what's going on, to maintain that inward separation. Again, I read this one last week as well. If you remember the example I gave of identification, you will see how blind a man is when he identifies with his moods, feelings, and thoughts. So again, try to become aware of your moods. Try to become aware of feelings. Try to become aware of yourself thinking thoughts. And here, again from last week, identification occurs when our energy and attention is fixed on one aspect of a thing. It is one-centered work, a form of hypnosis, and must be distinguished from concentration and attention, which are useful and necessary. So this gives us another means of fighting identification. If we can become aware of speaking while remaining aware of our body, we are actually engaging in a two-brained activity. If we can become aware of the muscles in our face and how we're holding tension and feeling in our body as we're talking, again, that's two-centered activity, and we're able to sort of break the chains of identification. So another inner exercise we can conduct is to try to bring this awareness of at least two of our brains into whatever we're doing. This comes from Paris wartime meetings. Prepare yourself to play exterior a role and interior not to identify. Questioner. When one begins to work here and outside, the relations that one can have with different persons seem as before to be modified, halting. Must keep the same expression as formerly, and one is embarrassed for one feels oneself changed, or must one change one's face and engage oneself in confusion and an improvement that one isn't capable of carrying out? And he's asking a question about an exercise that Mr. Gurdjieff gave them to play a role, to outwardly change nothing, but inwardly be like an actor playing the role of yourself, so that no one notices that you're different, but you are playing a role. And by playing that role of yourself, you are separating yourself from yourself. You're moving into that state of non-identification. Gurdjieff, well, you haven't understood the task I gave you. I told you to learn, to prepare yourself to play exterior a role and interior not to identify yourself. Interior, you do the work given here. Exterior, you change nothing. You should be as before. Before you were doing like that, now you do the same. Play a role without anyone noticing that something is going on in you. Change nothing. You remain as you were before, but you play a role. Well then, you will understand what it is to play a role. You will do the same thing you did 6 months ago. You change, only interior. This is a profound exercise to play and pretend you're playing the role of yourself. when you are in a social situation. Make the same jokes, laugh at the same things that people think are funny, move in the same way, but as an actor, playing the role. And it's not like you're playing someone else. You're playing a role that you know very well. This is also in Paris wartime meetings. I saw myself as a stranger. Questioner. I tried to continue the exercise of division into two, and seeing that I could not succeed in it, I thought that this came about because the I in me was not strong enough. All my attention was moved to I am, and in effect, this has developed little by little a very much stronger sensation that I had never had of I. In effect, this changed all values for me, that what I had understood theoretically till now, I understood now in a different way, and this has made me understand also many problems which fixed in me, especially the necessity for me, have ceased from this moment to play a role. But as during the vacation I was rather alone in the role that I had to play it with my parents and above all with my mother. There is where the difficulty arrived. I ascertained that I was completely incapable of playing a role, that it was impossible. Gurdjieff, you have understood what it was to play a role. You have understood what value this has for you. You have tasted it. Bravo. Questioner. Then I strove further with the exercise of division. I tried to understand it, and one day in passing before a mirror, I was very surprised to see that I saw myself as a stranger. I thought that I ought to make use of this evidence in order to do this exercise. After, in doing the exercise, I saw myself as I had seen myself in the mirror. I have had only one cold picture without life. I saw a body without life, and I tried to establish relations with my real body. In trying to do it, it seemed to me that this gave me in advance a taste of what might be the division. I felt that one had to do this. The division that they're talking about is the separation from the self, of the self, from the self. Gurdjieff, it is enough. You are born. Your individuality is born. Before you were like an animal without I. Now you have an I and the properties of a man. This exercise has given you these. Before you had no individuality. You were the result of your body, like a dog, a cat, or a camel. Now, if you have horns, you can see them and be amazed at them. Before you could see nothing. You now have an individuality. Addressing the others. He has acquired an individuality. Before he had none. He was a piece of meat. He could have worked 1,000 years. He would never have had any result. You are a comrade of Madame Frank. Both of you can become initiates at the first initiation. It is a little thing, but it is a big thing, a guarantee of the future. I congratulate you also. For the first time in 3 years, I am happy internally. I am happy about my efforts because this is not by chance. There they're here are already two. To the questioner, you are now no longer betrothed, no longer. You are my younger brother. I want to focus on this for the first time in 3 years. I am happy internally. What he's saying here is that he has been working with this group of people for 3 years. And in the 3 years, and this is Mr. Gurdjieff, this is not someone else. This is Mr. Gurdjieff working with this group for 3 years. 2 members of the group, this man and Madame Frank, whoever she is, are starting to be able to inwardly separate from themselves. Going back, before you were like an animal without I. And again in the yellow, before you had no individuality. You were the result of your body like a dog, a cat, or a camel. When we are in the state of identification, we are like a piece of meat. We are not human beings, we are machines. And he uses the phrase I, or the I am, to be aware of that inner part, that separation of the self from the self. That separated inner self, he gives this label here, I, their individuality. So by engaging in these processes, by attempting to or non-identify, we are developing our own individuality. We are growing this awareness within ourselves that will transform our being and will stop us from being a mere piece of meat, like a dog or a cat or a camel. So these are my reflections, some of the exercises. I sort of added to a little bit. I posted this to our small groups Facebook message board or on Messenger. It thinks, it feels, it is hungry, it is cold. Identification is related to it. And non-identification involves separating the I am from the it. So when I get caught up in my thoughts and become identified with my thoughts in that state, I can rightly say it thinks. But if you have the presence of mind, because attention does come from the mind. This ability to be mindful starts in the prefrontal cortex. It's what makes us human. Try to observe it thinking, it feeling, it wanting that cup of coffee, it being hungry. The part that is observing is the I. It's that individuality that we are growing, and the it is the piece of meat self, the mechanical self, the machine-like self. So try to catch it thinking. But rather than stopping the flow of words and associations running through your mind, try to step back behind this part in you and become aware that it is like a function, like a machine, like a function. As Mr. Gurdjieff says, separate yourself from yourself. Allow it to continue, but stop identifying yourself with it and just observe it. So for me, it's to observe it thinking, to observe those thoughts in my mind and realize that those thoughts are not me, that I'm something deeper and far more profound than those thoughts. Try to become aware of the it involved in feeling. The it that is different from the I am. This is a little easier, at least in my case, because when you become aware of it thinking, or at least when I become aware of it thinking, it is like that part hiccups for a second. And by observing it, it changes. And this is why I found it easier when I'm in the kitchen by myself, to think out loud, hearing that, somehow verbalizing and vocalizing the words, even though they would be flowing around in my head, allows me to separate from it, from that aspect, and see it as an it. But emotions are all body-based. I touched on this before. There's a feeling circuit in your body, and the primary feeling circuit runs from our duodenum up through our stomach, liver, spleen, pancreas, lungs, heart, chest, throat. Up to this point, it follows along the brain cells scattered along the 10th cranial nerve, called the vagus nerve, and into the jaw, mouth, face, eyes, and tear ducts. So name the emotion. Try to inwardly separate from it and become aware of where it manifests in your body. Is it that feeling, that emotion in the gut, the throat, the muscles in your face? The feeling function is a little bit easier to observe because observing it doesn't cause that hiccup that I notice when I begin to observe the thoughts in my brain. But as I said, the prefrontal cortex is actually the seat of our ability to be mindful, that seat of attention. And so it's up in the head brain, and I find that when I try to become aware of the thoughts, it can have a little bit of a hiccup, but it's much easier for me to observe what my body is feeling, to observe what my feeling center is feeling, and become aware of it feeling. Try to separate yourself from any sensations of hunger. Become aware that it is hungry, not that I am hungry. Become aware that it is tired, not that I am tired. It is tired. My body is tired. My brain is tired. Try to become aware that it touches the door handle. Try to become aware of it sitting in the chair right now. So these are just some exercises, some ways to think about this process of non-identifying. I'm running out of time again. I wanted to get into external considering, which is a profound act of mindful awareness. I'll just briefly start. Before I was trained in hypnosis, I became an NLP practitioner. That stands for your neuro-linguistic programming. I think the name is really a misnomer. It's really a communication system. And for instance, as a hypnotherapist, I've been taught that if I focus on someone's rate of breathing, not staring at their chest, because for obvious reasons, especially if you're talking to a woman, it can be taken the wrong way, but you can stare at a point just above the shoulders, and you can see the shoulders rising and falling. And this is a profound act of mindful awareness. It's a profound act of observation. And if I phrase my phrases in such a way that I begin to follow someone's breathing, I will actually begin to put them into a trance. It's a profound act of mindful awareness. Now within NLP as well, they don't put it this way, but after 30 years of reflection, we like people who remind ourselves of ourselves. And there are many ways to do this. And there's a process that's called mirroring. Now, they found that if someone catches you mirroring them, you will break rapport. But mirroring is if someone moves their arm, to move your arm, to be a mirror of them. And here it becomes a profound act in mindful awareness of their movements. And also you have to maintain that awareness of the sensation of your body. They actually say it's better to partially mirror or cross mirror. So if someone does this, you do this. Someone moves forward in a real big way, you move forward in a little way. If you're sitting at a coffee shop with someone and they reach for their cup, with their right hand, reach for your cup. At the subconscious level, the subconscious mind will pick up on the similarities, and the subconscious mind will be more relaxed. People like people who remind themselves of themselves. There are more advanced techniques. I don't want to get into it with just 4 minutes left in this meeting. But when you think about externally considering someone else, when you begin to focus your mindful awareness on them, just that act of mindfulness helps you to begin that inward separation. And when you bring an awareness not just into them, but into yourself as a vehicle to communicate with them, to harmonize with them, to make them feel more comfortable, you are entering into the state of external considering. I will bring it up next week. There was in the Paris meetings, wartime talks, Mr. Gurdjieff was describing how to externally consider by making sure that you focus on the other person's needs, that you focus on making them happy. That requires what they call in NLP state control. You have to control your own inner state. In other words, you have to maintain an awareness of your inner state. You can't get lost in whatever you're feeling. You've got to maintain that inward distance from yourself, to observe yourself, to hold that state. Perhaps the state you want to hold on to is a state of fascination, and you want to feel fascinated even though you may be bored, silly with that person. But you hold on to that inward state and you pay real close attention. In other words, to become really mindful, really personally conscious of that other person, how they move, the words that they use, the movement of their eyes. And in a sense, you begin to dance with them. You're doing it consciously. They're not aware of it at the conscious level. They're aware of it at the subconscious level. And they become far more receptive to what you say. And, you know, this is a profound act of externally considering. It shows us that externally considering, as opposed to internally considering is just poor me, or why did they do that to me, or internally considering is really inflamed, and at the base of it is our ego and me, my, mine, and whatever. But externally considering, we have to get rid of that. And it becomes more of an act of mindful awareness. We really begin not just only to pay attention to the other person, but to pay attention to how we affect the other person. How when we smile, they smile. This is something Angelica noticed with that person. with the papers and the bureaucracy, when she stopped internally considering and started externally considering and calming down and paying attention to him. It was such a unusual experience, because in those official, where you got to stamp papers, people are all negative towards you. The people who work at driver's license offices and passport offices, they get a lot of that negativity. And just to begin to become mindful of them, to become mindful of your own state, to control your own state, to control the way you respond to them, is externally considering. I'll talk about this next week, but again, I'd like your observations to begin. I'd like to begin with your observations again on identification. In Search of the Miraculous, it's such a small portion of that book, but it is such a huge part of the work that, it's something that we need to go into detail, and exploring this in your own lives, and then bringing that information to the group and sharing it with the group will allow people who are watching this on Facebook or who will be watching it on YouTube to learn and, hopefully grow from some of the examples you give. We're all different. I tend to be, when I was identified, it tends to be more head brain than anything. We're all different. We can bring different experiences and stories to the process. At any rate, I've gone slightly over time. I've got a client coming soon. I would like to thank you all for being here. Observe yourself, try to disidentify, and bring your awarenesses back next week. Thank you very much. Take care. Bye now.
Thanks, Allan.